Hello, viewers far and wide. You know what time it is. Time for another episode in the Topaz Storytelling Club saga. Week 8 is now upon us on this fine day of August 14th, 2019, and today we welcomed 6 members into our group, the same number as last week. Let's get right into things, presented by your host Caitlin, without any further ado. As they say, enjoy the show. Our story for today fits right in with our show-stopping theme, because we're reading the magnificently wacky Dr. Seuss book called If I Ran the Circus. It's all about the fanciful, over-the-big-top dreams of a young boy who imagines how he would transform a vacant lot. He longs to have his own circus, filled with the most daring stunts and exotic animals. We all know Dr. Seuss, so you can be sure hilarious tongue twisters and nonsensical fun ensued. And in the midst of it all is a little boy who's in charge of the whole thing, which ties in precisely to what we're going to be talking about today: perspective, also called point of view, and how it influences a story. We'll just stick with the term point of view going forward, because it might be an easier way to explain it to your child. So, what is point of view? It's the way the author chooses to narrate the story, the way he wants to let the audience see it. Sometimes the narrator of a story is an actual character within it, and other times the narration is just occurring in some unexplored, blank place from a nondescript voice. If the narrator is a character, he can be involved in a number of ways, whether he is completely separate from the events of the plot and is merely retelling what he knows, or whether he is integral to the action. We'll talk about these different types of point of view later. But first, I began the TSC discussion with the kids by addressing the fact that this book was different than all 7 of the other books I've read. I asked what made it so. If you've been following along thus far and reading the same stories to your child that I have, I invite you to ask the same question. None of the TSC members present had been there for all 7 of the prior meetings, so I just told them. It's not a question of what exactly is different, but rather how it's different. This story, I said, was unique because it was told to us from the boy's point of view. He was both the one in the story and the one telling us the story. I introduced the idea of point of view, but no one quite understood it at first. So let's try analyzing the idea of point of view and how it can be different. What does the term make your child think of? Be sure to ask. When you view something, you're observing what happens, right? And you can get different views depending on what you're looking at and where you stand. You can be on top of a hill to get a higher view, or face the opposite direction to get a whole new way of seeing things. That is sort of the basic idea of how point of view works in a story, too. Now for those 3 basic types I mentioned. They are first person, second person, and third person point of view. First person point of view is sort of like hearing a story straight from the first source, the people who were actually there. First person is up close and personal, and we tell the story using pronouns to match, like I, me, and we. Think of it like the character's personal journal. Your child probably is most familiar with this perspective from books like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, another of my childhood staples. Next, second person point of view is a way to communicate directly to the reader, with pronouns like you and your. It isn't commonly used in stories, since it makes the character you rather than anyone specific, but you'll see it more commonly in things like instruction manuals or recipes. Rather than saying, she frosted the cookies, it's more likely to say, frost the cookies, like a command, with the implied subject being you. Third person point of view, meanwhile, is more neutral. First person and second person are each sort of like a conversation, where the person talking, the narrator, is speaking tangibly about either you or himself. However, third person takes that degree of intimacy away somewhat by using pronouns like he, she, and they to separate the world of the story from the reader's world. Each point of view type has different strengths and weaknesses, so knowing which one you want to use can help shape the direction of your story. So, after hearing about these 3 types, ask your child which kind of perspective is which, and why there are different types in the first place. Also ask what kind he'd most like to read. During our discussion, the TSC kids all thought that first person was more interesting, as I suspected. First person is great to engage younger readers in the story. Second person also tends to work better for kids' stories than for adults, because what kid doesn't want to feel like part of the action? If your child has read today's book, also ask which perspective is used in If I Ran the Circus. There's a hint in the title itself. Remember the pronouns? That's right, it's first person. The narrator is the boy who's telling us everything about the circus from his point of view. These videos, for another example, are written mostly from a first-person perspective, since I am the one talking after all, but I also occasionally will address just you, the viewer, which would be an example of second-person point of view. After all, I'm not so much telling a story as I am telling you how to tell a story, if that makes sense. Phew, that was a lot to unpack, but we aren't quite done yet. Not only does point of view encompass those 3 basic types, but it also refers to which character in particular has said point of view. Whether you write in first person or third person, the narration can come from someone within the story who has his own personality and beliefs about what's happening. For example, going back to If I Ran the Circus, Yes, it's told in first-person perspective, but knowing which character's perspective is equally important. We read it as if we were hearing the thoughts of the little boy, who is imaginative and excited about owning a circus. We learn he can come up with amazing ideas about what he would do with a vacant lot behind a local man's store. But what if the story, while still remaining in first person, was from that man's perspective instead? He wouldn't know any of the boy's amazing ideas since he can't read minds. The story likely wouldn't be nearly as exciting, but because we don't know much about this background character from the boy's perspective, perhaps we would learn a lot about the man from his own perspective. Maybe he has a dream of making his store bigger, or planting a garden in the vacant lot. Perspective can tell us a lot about the character. For example, from first person, we can most easily see how the character views himself, which may contrast with how he is perceived by others, including the reader. With a simple point of view change, the whole story has the potential to shift as well. It's a much more powerful tool than it may seem at first glance, so when an author writes a story, he needs to choose his perspective wisely. Whose viewpoint would create the most interesting story? Here's another way of looking at it. Point of view is what determines how the story is told and affects the language you use throughout. If you were crafting a story like you make a cake, think of the point of view that you use as sort of like the cake pan. The characters and metaphors and all of those details are like the ingredients that give the cake its unique flavor, but point of view gives the story its shape and a framework for how it all fits together. You could have a circular cake, a rectangular cake, or maybe even a bunch of little cupcakes. In the same way, you can have lots of different perspectives, whether from just one character or multiple characters. Our activity today was a simple trial of applying first-person point of view. Following the fantastical path of today's story, I gave each TSC member an exciting event and asked questions about it that all of them answered on paper. What would you do? How would you react? They all understood it quite well, and there were no errors in pronoun use. Plus, there were lots of fun and creative answers. If you want to see examples so you can try it out at home with your child, check out my website. Then we moved on to the free write. I gave them the word of the day, which was extravaganza, an amazing event or show. The writing prompt I gave the kids was to write a story in first-person perspective about all the things they could do if anything in the world were possible. If you want, feel free to give your child the same story prompt and see where his imagination takes him. I too wrote lots of stories at that age about all the things I wished to be. Or you could try writing 3 stories, one with each type of point of view. In other news, our surveys are looking good, and I'm happy that another TSC meeting has wrapped up successfully. Catch you all next time. Thanks for watching.